Have you noticed this starting to happen to your barefoot shoes? After making my review of the Vivobarefoot Primus Lite 3s, I received a lot of feedback from people who had the exact same issue with the top mesh material breaking. While this is somewhat an issue with Vivobarefoot shoe quality, at least in this particular instance, it actually speaks to a much larger issue. An issue concerning muscular insufficiencies in and around ankle dorsiflexion. Let me explain. When my toes are pointed down like this, we call it plantar flexion. And when my foot is brought up towards my shins like this, we call this dorsiflexion. Conventional shoes will have a drop from heel to toe to varying degrees. So when you wear this shoe, your toes will be pointed downwards, or you'll be in a state of plantar flexion. Barefoot shoes or zero drop shoes characteristically don't have the elevation difference between heel and toe. They're more or less flat by design. Part of the gait cycle will involve my foot having to lift in order to bring my foot forward. As I'm demonstrating with the books, if I start in a position of heel elevation, it's actually a lot easier for me to pick up my feet off the ground for two reasons. Firstly, my heel is already elevated, so I'm just going from a state of plantar flexion to a neutral state. Secondly, when my heel is elevated, my tibia is in a reasonably backwards position, which gives me more room to play with if I lack mobility in my ankle. Now, let's take away this heel elevation to more resemble barefoot mechanics. We still need to achieve sufficient lift, but we're doing so from a point where we can't leverage the form of our shoe to do the heavy lifting. We need to lift from a fairly neutral stance to a state of dorsiflexion. In this case, one common area that tries to compensate is the prying up of the big toe in order to almost force you into a state of dorsiflexion. Naturally, a scenario where the big toe is moving far more than it ought to is going to cause unprecedented damage to the top of the shoe because there's an unprecedented amount of stress being placed upon the shoe. Dorsiflexion involves significant strength from multiple muscles in your body, but most notably the tibialis anterior. Conventional shoes remove the need to utilize the tibialis anterior due to the heel elevation that I demonstrated in the clip before. As a result, most people lack strength and mobility in this area and will likely have to compensate from other areas of their body. So I do think that Vivobarefoot are partially to blame here. I do think that their research probably focused too much on how natural gait mechanics ought to look rather than how newcomers getting into barefoot are going to adapt to natural movement. There is, however, a more far-reaching issue here that I see. I couldn't really find a coined term for it. If there is one, just let me know. But for the time being, I'm going to call it technological atrophy dependency. Really rolls off the tongue. So here's how I think it play out in this situation. Conventional shoes remove the need for adequate dorsiflexion, strength, and mobility. Thus, people no longer have adequate dorsiflexion, strength, and mobility. People now depend on conventional footwear in order to address their issues of lacking dorsiflexion, strength, and mobility, and so on and so on. Now, I'm not a professional. Take my advice with a pinch of salt. But just know that I have experienced this issue before and I have dealt with it for my own body. This is what I did and this is how I would do it. Now, to be honest, I'd actually just recommend going straight over to the Knees Over Toes guy channel and incorporate his protocols into your routine. But something that will definitely help you achieve more strength in the tibialis anterior is the tib raise. Simply lean against the wall, keep your heels on the ground, and lift up your feet while trying not to pull from the toes. You can increase the load by moving the feet out away from the wall like this, and decrease the load by bringing your feet closer to the wall. At the same time as strengthening, I was also trying to increase my ankle mobility through the likes of deep squatting. So feet apart, feet flat on the ground, try and get down in the squat as much as you can. It took me quite a long time to get to this position because I needed to open up my hips and knees. I couldn't get into this position at first, but when you do, it's really good, so I highly recommend it. So I would make sure that my feet are flat on the ground, and then I would just ever so slightly place my weight on the front of each foot and rock back and forth, making sure not to cause any injury, of course. And if squats are too difficult right now, I'd still encourage you to keep trying at it, but anything that allows your knee to move past your toes is going to be beneficial for increasing this mobility, as long as you do it safely. Lastly is a piece of advice that I would give as somebody who's had a long toe injury from jumping into barefoot movement far too quickly. Buy a different pair of shoes and use barefoot shoes intermittently at first. I'm going to use a shoe to demonstrate, but when your toes are in a hyperextended position like this, and they shouldn't be, you're creating a lot of stress on the balls of your feet, and that is most likely going to lead to injury. We don't want that. You're going to need some extra padding for the time being. I personally use the Altra Escalante 3s. I'm not sponsored by them in any way. I just really like how they have a very wide toe box, just like a barefoot shoe. They're more or less zero drop, so you're not going to be in a state of plantar flexion like in conventional shoes, and they've got a lot more padding. I've got a link in the description if you want to check these guys out. I do recommend them. If you want me to make a review, I can. Just a bit of realistic advice. Get some shoes that have padding, because you're going to regret it if you don't. Okay, let's wrap this up. Your toes are moving far more than they need to, and that's causing wear and tear on the top of your shoe, especially if it's a barefoot shoe. Your toe is moving more than it needs to because you lack dorsiflexor strength and/or mobility. So if you want to stop this from happening, you have to train dorsiflexion strength and/or mobility. I hope you liked this video. If you found any of the information useful, I would super appreciate if you just left a like on the video. It goes a long way, especially for a new creator like me. And if you want to check out more of my videos, you can check out my review of the Vivobarefoot Primus Lite 3s here, or you can check out the more exciting video here where I do a week-long experiment on earthing or grounding. Catch you later.